This is Teen Talks with Miguel.
Welcome to a new episode. And if you haven't been living under a rock for maybe the past 10 years, you know who I'm talking to right now, or watched too many FNAF floors as I did. Um, welcome, MatPat. How you doing?
I am doing very well, sir. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. So let's start off with the first question. So YouTube is like very hard. You need to have a good like a set of like communication and stuff. So when you realize you have this talent to communicate with people and connect.
Yeah. Oh, when did I realize it?
Yeah, when you realized it, yeah.
Honestly, I do I have a talent to communicate and connect with people? It's one of those things that you learn and you grow with time, right? I always had a love of performing, and I always had a love of teaching people. Like I remember in seventh grade, there was a day where my math teacher was out, and she kind of like assigned a handful of us to like act as substitute teachers for the day. And I remember really enjoying that. We were talking about the quadratic equation. And so I got to teach, for 15 minutes in my math class, my fellow, whatever, seventh graders about the quadratic equation. And that was a big moment for me. And it was really satisfying to impart that knowledge to people. But it's one of those things that like, you learn and you grow with time. Like if you look at old game theory, I don't think I was as good of a communicator or of a teacher as I became a year, 2 years, 3 years into the show, right? And so all skills you grow better with time, and you grow better with practice. And so if you want to do something, the best thing to start doing is to just do it, right? And at first you're going to suck, and it's going to be embarrassing, and it's going to be cringy, and you're going to look back and then be like, ooh, that was rough. But over time and through practice and through looking objectively at how you're doing and taking notes from friends and loved ones and comments and things like that, you get better and better and better. And eventually you become that thing you aspire to, which is great. And so I think that's the journey that I went on. Is I found something that I was really excited about, that was really fun for me, and that I was excited week over week to improve upon. And lo and behold, here we are, like you said, a decade plus later. Yeah. I'd say I'm pretty good at it.
So this is a bit of more personal question. Out of like that, I know it's going to be hard, but out of the thousands of videos you did, what's your favorite one?
Oh, that's, I get that one asked a lot. And it's funny because in digital video, you are constantly moving on to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And rarely are you going back to kind of like rewatch your old work. But now that I'm retired, and now that a lot of my week to week is helping to impart knowledge to the creative directors, to the new hosts, to the rest of the team, it's afforded me the possibility of going back and taking the time to look at some of those old episodes and critique myself, and also appreciate the work that came in those early days. And I go back and I'm like, oh, that was a really good episode. Or like, oh, I remember this one being good. I'm like, oh, wow, it really holds up to this day. And so the ones that I always cite as some of my all-time favorites were the Peach is dead, Rosalina is Peach's father, or Rosalina and Peach are related theories. Rosalina Unmasked. It's a two-parter. It was early days of game theory. And the reason I select that one is because it really distilled what I wanted game theory to be, which was this idea of we're doing deep lore research while mixing it in with deep real world research. We're pulling from like the French translation of the game. We're pulling from like genetics research and space research and all this stuff. And that was really satisfying. And so that episode felt, and the theory at the end of the day was one that I'm like, hey, that's pretty solid. Like I couldn't believe that one. And so I feel really good about that. I love the presentation style of that one. The one that I literally was talking to the team about 2 days ago, and we all kind of like went in and critiqued and we're like, wow, that was good, was Bowser's Broken Home, which was all about how Bowser was an orphan and had adopted the Koopalings into his family, and how he's kind of a surrogate dad to all of these kids, so that way they don't have to go through the same upbringing that he did. And that's a really good one too.
That's a very good theory. I will not lie.
Yeah,
that's and pretty deep also. No?
Yes, yeah, oh, very much so. And I look back and I'm like, oh, that was like from an evidentiary standpoint, it's okay, but from like selling the narrative and telling like this pretty moving story about this like historic villain, I'm like, oh, that was really solid. And then of course the last series to kind of bring up or talk about is obviously Five Nights at Freddy's. No one specific theory, but rather like I look across the eras of FNAF theories, and I can tell you exactly who was working on those episodes and when. And so for me personally, getting to work with so many talented editors, so many other talented researchers and writers, that series, I think everyone who's ever really worked with theorists has touched those episodes in some way, right? And so I look across the 69 episodes or whatever it was. I think 68 is what I ended up doing. 68 episodes of FNAF, and I'm like, oh, it's
Oh,
cool to look across those and see the different eras of the company and the different eras of people that I was working with and how everyone put their own unique spin on that creative, which is so satisfying and so rewarding. It's like a little personal memory album in a lot of ways.
yeah, 68 episodes. Well, to be fair, FNAF changed a lot from like the years. Like I remember playing the first one and like of course like pooping my pants and and uh and yeah, like it's so different from like the first to the second to the third to the
Mhm.
fourth, and it's like there's so much story behind it, and like
Yeah.
I loved it.
Well,
Um,
it's a lot about, I mean, you look at us too. You look at the internet, and I think FNAF is a really good example of evolving yourself in order to stay ahead of the trends and in order to stay fresh, right? Like you could do the same thing for years and years and years and years, but eventually your audience grows out of you, or eventually you grow stale, you start recycling the same ideas. And so in order to kind of keep creatively interested, in order to stay relevant, you have to grow and adapt and change. I say, like, I look at some of these old game theories and they still hold up to this day, but it's a very different ecosystem back then to what it is today, right? And I remember like there were times in game theory's history where it's like there's not a whole lot to talk about, so let's open the door to a whole new gateway of content, which is like ARGs, or hey, audiences seem to be less excited, less interested by the deep science talk that game theory was really founded on. What if we lean more into kind of like the lore solving and see how that goes, right? And so over time, yes, it's still the same approach to the show of like, let's do deep research, let's overthink video games, but the angle and way you're doing it or the subjects that you're covering evolve and change and tweak over time to keep the show fresh and interesting and relevant to new audiences. Another really good one that comes to mind is, in recent years, with so many people attached to like the gig economy and being their own business people, and the audience just being more financially savvy and more aware of kind of the economic state of the world, I was able to lean more into meta commentary on the finances of gaming, or the finances of DLC, or the economics of YouTube in a lot of cases, and looking at those episodes that we did in kind of like my later days as host, I would never have been able to cover those in the early days of game theory because I wasn't ready for it as a host, nor was the audience ready to kind of like think that way about this industry or YouTube or anything like that. And so again, over time, just by the way that the world and content evolves, those sorts of things open up, which is really exciting as a creative.
well, that's so you basically waited to like the audience to like get more used to the content, like this maybe the shift as you're saying.
Yeah, it's twofold, right? It's or actually I would say even threefold. It's what I enjoy as a creative and as someone who's just like interested in the world and the content that I'm making, what's interesting to me and kind of what sources are feeding into, my decisions. Couple that with where the audience is and kind of what they're into at any given point in time. A couple years ago, there was the huge Minecraft boom with the new surge of kind of like the 10-year anniversary of Minecraft. PewDiePie's playing Minecraft again. You had the Dream SMP at the time, which was a huge thing, which suddenly saw a rebirth of Minecraft content. So all of a sudden, that's the ecosystem kind of telling you, hey, maybe it's worth reevaluating Minecraft, or kind of like hopping back into that and seeing what exists there, which as a content creator, like, okay, I'm going to dive into that angle. And then there's the third avenue that's kind of like informing you, which is just the wider world and the wider ecosystem, right? Like, hey, audiences are growing up. The state of the economy is a thing. People are, it's an election year. And so people are really looking at political issues or whatever. There's wars in the world, what have you. And all of that kind of feeds into the decisions that you're making as you're deciding what's the video of the week, what are the themes that I'm going to be touching on, what sort of stuff is going to be satisfying for me to cover and for the audience to watch.
So just changing up the topic.
Yeah.
The reason I created Teen Talks is because teens and especially young adults, they feel confused in what they're doing, right? And I got really touched by this research that they did, that 75% of people feel disengaged in their jobs and 20% of people feel like sad. Do you think it's how important is like happiness at work for you? In your opinion, is it possible just to work for money and be emotionally healthy?
Wow. I like that we went from like, let's talk about FNAF to like, hey, here's an existential question about happiness and whether happiness and work can coexist. Like,
yes, keep changing, keep changing.
Yes, right, like pull the rug out. Here's the thing. I think in an ideal world, yes, you want to well, it's a tricky question because I think there's a lot of different ways to tackle it. I think on one hand, you have this fallacy in a lot of ways where work and doing what you love have been kind of like attached to each other, and that like in this internet age where you see very publicly facing a lot of YouTubers like, look at me, I was able to make a lot of money by doing this thing that I love or whatever, and that is a very select crew of people who have been able to be successful at that, right? And I think there's been kind of this push away from like, oh, sometimes the job is the thing that just gets, you have to do it to pay the bills, right? I think in an ideal world, there is synergies there. And I think there's also a happiness that comes with the achievement of doing a good job, right? And the self-actualization of knowing like, hey, this might not be my dream job, but I'm going to knock it out of the ballpark and I'm going to be really good at it. And I'm going to put everything into doing good work. Like, I think there is an incredible value, and I think that there's an incredible respect for just doing good work and putting out stuff in the world that you can be proud of, right? Like, I remember when I was struggling to find a job before game theory existed, and I was applying for jobs as a waiter, and I was taking up like short little one-off gigs as like singing bell ringer for the Salvation Army in the middle of winter in New York, right? And were those glamorous jobs? Were those things that were, is this my be all end all? Is this the thing that's going to make me the happiest in the world? No, definitely not. But I got a lot of satisfaction out of like, hey, if I'm going to do this, then I'm going to put my all into this, and I'm going to be the best darn bell ringer there is, and I'm going to be the best darn server, lighting designer, whatever there is. So that way, even though it's not the dream job, I can look at what I did and I can be proud of that. And so
Wow.
I think, yeah. And so I think that like, that's, it can exist, right? I think there is this element of just disconnect in general, right? Where society exists right now, where so much of our life exists on screens and disconnected from the reality and the people and stuff around us, that we're all, and the algorithms and social media and stuff are presenting you with like, wow, look at the ideal, look at the flexing, look at the big numbers and the flashy experiences and this and that. But isn't life beautiful over here? The grass is always greener. And I think it's caused a lot of us to forget that like, hey, there is nobility and there is satisfaction to be had in our everyday lives, and that's great and that's beautiful.
I like about the content creation part.
Yeah.
I think we are in that. I think it's safe to say that there's like a time period that is like before AI and after AI.
Yeah.
Do you think AI is gonna like substitute like creators, because like it's gonna be so cheap for like maybe companies to put like an AI and do the video, or you think there's need to be like a human touch to it?
That's again, wow, with the gut punches. I think AI is pretty terrifying, like in good and bad ways, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's this very early kind of experimental product that exists. I think it's Google Notebook is the name of it. But basically, what you do is it can like listen in on a meeting, or you upload a file, or you upload some like PowerPoint slides or whatever, and it takes that and it turns it into like a 20-minute podcast between two people who don't exist, that are just AI voices, summarizing everything that you just kind of ingested into this thing.
Yeah, I
Even
saw it. It's crazy. Like
yeah,
having like a podcast of yourself, of the
yeah,
things you're in. Yeah,
it's
that's
it's crazy. And when I say like it's crazy, I mean you can't tell that they're AI voices talking to each other, and also even like the little human nuances of the vocal stutters, or the like the little like affirmations that we give each other, like, oh yeah, that's interesting, or whatever, like, oh no way,
yeah.
all of that is replicated through this tool. And we uploaded just to experiment with it, because we're always like looking at different tools and we're trying to stay aware of like what exists in the space just for our own knowledge.
Mhm.
And when one of the members of our analytics team brought it to me, and we were like looking at this, like we listened to it and we're like, this is like, I would never know that this is
AI.
not human created, that this isn't a real thing that I just saw created within 20, like it was like 5 minutes for the machine to spit this back out. It was wild. And so I think that that showcases, and it's still early days. Like I think the other caveat to this whole thing is like, this is still like year one of people really turning their attention, focusing in on AI. Like obviously it's been in the works for a while, but this is still very early in this process of where these tools are at. And so I think that there is, like, I like to think that there is absolutely that little je ne sais quoi, that little spark that humans bring to the table, that is going to separate the like good from just the computer generator, right? And what helps elevate this stuff beyond just kind of like what the computer is able to churn out.
Yeah.
And so I like to think that, and I'm hopeful that that's the case. And I think that it will be hard for computers to replicate that, but I do think that, you know, based on the speed and the cost in a lot of cases of how cheap it is to produce a lot of this stuff, it makes it so much easier to like pump out a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
So, you know, in a world where there's 90% of stuff that is AI generated versus like the 10% stuff that's human created, it's a tough battle to win in a lot of cases. But I like to think that there is synergies that will exist there, where it's an art form like anything else. Just like it took people years of figuring out how to paint before computers and faster tools could like mimic the same level of painting or whatever. I think so too. Humans are going to be able to use these tools to craft their own stories maybe faster and easier and lower that barrier to entry, but more stories get told through that, which is cool.
Um, though getting off from the gut punches, right?
Sure.
um, this is for me. It's very important. You know, I've been a gamer basically my whole life.
Yeah.
And what's your favorite video game of all time?
Oh, favorite video game of all time is absolutely Earthbound. Easy. Easy
Earthbound.
every time. Love Earthbound. Earthbound, Mother 2. Um, I also love Chrono Trigger. Those are always the two that I throw out, because time travel and being able to phase through different time periods and react to that is beautiful and wonderful. And I've always wanted to be able to travel through time. And then Earthbound is so unique and quirky in its sense of humor. I love the style of it. And I think again, at the end of the day, the story that it tells about this, like, you know, the series of kids who are willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good of humanity and to save the world is so powerful and so moving that it really affected me as a kid, and showcased the power of video games.
For me, it's so hard, but I would say it's basic, but I'll give the context. It's The Last of Us, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. Great choice.
And like it because basically I used to live in Brazil at the time, and everything releases 1 year after. So
Mhm.
for example, the PS5 releases 1 year after in Brazil. And my dad, he went to the United States without me knowing and got the PS4 for
Yeah.
me. And the first game that was there, The Last of Us. And I remember playing that. And I just remember in the beginning just like tearing up and seeing like, oh my God, like this is like in a game.
Yeah.
And like it's actually like it's actually like a storytelling, you know, it's like a movie, and like you're, and I think it's even more impactful that you're like controlling these like characters, like because you feel like you're part of their lives.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. Like I think for a while there was that debate about whether video games are art, right? That was the debate for the longest time. I remember again the changing tides of content on online. In the early days of me doing game theory, that was always one of the debates that happened on websites and on early YouTube videos, like, oh, can video games be art? But I think at this point, you don't hear that conversation anymore because we all recognize, yeah, of course they are. You have games like The Last of Us that are telling these incredibly human stories, and these are so emotional and so beautiful in the way that they're communicating the human experience and putting you into the shoes of these characters, and making you live through these tough decisions and live through these incredible moments, that of course they're art. And yeah, and to me, those are the sorts of games that I really respond to. Last of Us, fantastic. Games that really emphasize the narrative element of it are always, and the storytelling element of it, like those are always the ones that get me. I love solid gameplay. I love a good gameplay loop. I love, nice mechanics and hidden Easter eggs and all this stuff. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if you tell me a really compelling story, that's the stuff I'm gonna, cite as my favorite over and over again.
No, yeah, like I've never been so much like an online guy.
Yeah.
I've been so like story mode,
Yep.
and for me, it's just like I don't know, more peaceful. I guess I don't know, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. I'm a single player guy, born and raised, and will continue to be.
Anyways,
Yep.
look, I'm sorry, but I think we're going back to the gut punches.
That's fine.
So,
You can punch my gut as many times as you want.
so you retired from your channels,
I am.
and um, it's like when I feel this, it's not the channel is not like from all over years and stuff. It's not, it doesn't have a decade of duration, but it's feel like it's like creating a child, right? It's like raising a baby into the world. And I just wanted to know, how was the process of like choosing the people who are going to be the hosts right after you?
I mean, it's tough. It's one that, like you said, you compare it to a child, and that's exactly what it is, right? Like when Steph and I talk about making the channel and talk about the business as a whole and all that stuff, we call it our first child, right? Or I guess Skip, our cat, was our first kid, and then like the channel happened shortly thereafter. Um, no, actually, we skip a second child because the business started and the channel started before we left New York. So actually, it's our first kid. Um, but yeah, like it's grown up, it matures, and it evolves and develops a personality unto itself, which is fascinating. Um, at the end of the day, one of the biggest considerations outside of experience and ability and kind of like earning their way into those roles was people who respected and understood the audience. I think in today's world, right, in YouTube 2024, there's a lot of talk about like optimizing your content for the algorithm, right? Oh, you got to like optimize X,
Yeah,
Y, and Z for the algorithm, and this is going to harness retention time and this and that. And that's all well and good, sure. But I think what's more important, and goes back to the AI question too, is optimizing your content for the audience, for
yeah,
for the viewer, right? Like I think one of the things that's sadly been lost or kind of been forgotten in current YouTube is that there's a viewer at the end of that watch pipeline, right? And that there is someone whose day that content is making, or someone who your video is making laugh or making cry, and or educating, right? And you're sharing, who's excited by that new upload, and you're sharing your recommendations, your thoughts, your feelings, and you're developing a relationship with that person. And that's such an important and such a precious relationship to foster and grow. And that to me was one of the saddest and hardest things about giving up the channels and kind of moving away from me as host, was giving up a portion of that relationship to the viewer. And in choosing who is next up to kind of take my shoes and fill that role, it was people who understood that relationship, who understood who we're talking to and how important those viewers are and how important our videos are in their lives, right? And who respected that relationship. There's any number of talented hosts, there's any number of talented script writers and editors and things like that. But being a good person who respects other people and can cherish that relationship and really kind of like take the reins of the trust that an audience is putting in you as a creator, it's few and far between. And when I look at the hosts that we have lined up, they are those people to kind of cherish that relationship, foster it, and continue growing it in a responsible way.
I just have a quick comment linking to the AI. Like sometimes I think people think that YouTube is like only content,
Mhm.
which it is content. But
Sure.
I think mostly like especially podcasting stuff, I think people just want to see two people interacting.
Yeah.
It's not just about the information they get out of there. It's just like the emotions they're feeling. Maybe they're relating to you from a story that you told, or relating to me. I think it's more like this human connection instead of content.
Yo, 100%. Yes, very much so. It became kind of a thing that people threw around a bunch, like, oh, you get what makes YouTube content so effective? Oh, it's authenticity. It's authenticity. And it became this buzzword that I think a lot of people thought it became meaningless, but it's 100% true, right? That idea of an authentic connection is the stuff that really stands out. And a lot of people call it's to that idea of like optimizing for an algorithm. We always bring up the word like it's content, right? Oh, here's more content. It's distraction, right? It's stuff flashing across a screen. What I think what the new hosts do, and what I was, what my goal always was to make videos, was to make a show, was to make something, to tell narratives, right? And to tell a story. And I think that goes beyond just content, just another thing in the feed, but something that feels substantial, thoughtful, and has love and humanity and emotion put into it, so that way it resonates to an audience. And that was always the goal.
So just to finish off
Yeah.
the interview, do you have any advice to the teenagers that are watching us to how to decide what to study at university or coming into the market?
Yeah. um I think what to study or what to do in the market, I think my recommendation would be find the thing that you are going to be excited by day in and day out, right? We talked a little bit about happiness and about whether work and happiness have to coincide. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I think something that's going to get you excited to learn and something that you again can produce and be proud of is the direction that you want to go, right? Like that is the ideal. Um and so, for me, I went in, I studied psychology, I studied neuroscience, I studied theater, and those were things that fascinated me, I was curious about, and I had all these thoughts about like experiments that I could run, and I had all these shows that I wanted to do, and I was so intrigued to learn more about how lighting and sound and direction worked and all of that stuff. And so as you're looking at kind of where you're studying or kind of the subjects that you're leaning into, to me, just ask yourself, like, what is that, what gives you that spark of excitement? What gives you that spark of curiosity? That because at the end of the day, when you're in a job, you're going to be doing that job for a year, 2 years, 10 years, 13 years, 20 years. My parents have been doing their job for 40 years, right? And that ecosystem has definitely changed. And a lot of the times that we spend in individual jobs have shortened, but it's a long time to commit a big chunk of your life.
Yeah,
It's easy to forget, but like the bulk of your life is working. I look at the last
very true.
13 years of doing this, and, thousands upon thousands of hours of my time on earth have been making videos in recording closets, writing notes on scripts and rewriting scripts, researching. And at no point, like, and sure, there are kind of like low points in that, but at no point was I ever like, oh, I'm not excited by this anymore. I'm not like curious about this anymore. I always wanted to learn and get better and grow because it was something that was rewarding to me. And so I think that's the thing. Maybe lean less on necessarily happiness and more on curiosity and skill building and looking at kind of like, how can I continue to self-actualize? How can I continue to grow through these, chosen subjects that I'm looking at?
Well, that's some very good advice.
Oh,
But
thanks.
thank you so much for coming here, giving the time to talk to the teenagers around the world.
Absolutely. Thank you
Do
for
you have
having me.
any final words?
I think at the end of the day, the things that I always wanted to leave people with is encouraging that intellectual curiosity and encouraging critical thought, right? if the Theorist channel stood for anything, it's questioning the stories that you're told and approaching, media and the world around you with a critical eye. Because at the end of the day, that's what we have, right? Is it's easy to passively accept information, but to question things, to look into stuff for yourself, to come to your own conclusions, and to keep an open mind about things and have conversations with people, that's the best. I had this motto for a long time, is that like through conversation with other people, that's where we learn the most. And we do that at scale through YouTube videos, but you can do that in your day-to-day life just by talking to other people and learning about their experiences.
Yeah,
And
that's what
that's
we're
so
doing right
incredibly
now.
powerful. Yeah,
That's
exactly. That's exactly it. It's like you said, it's the podcast. It's two people relating, and there's so much value there. And so keep focused on that in a world that is overwhelming with information, and everyone's shouting information at you, and there's so much division in the world. Like, just keep an open mind, talk to each other, and remember that like we're all human at the end of the day. We're all doing our best to make it through this world.
Look, once again, thank you so much, guys. See you in the next episode. Bye bye.